the rubrics really guide my instruction of skills and really narrow down what I know that I should be asking students to do. And it's really helpful because I think that there's so many things we always want to teach that when I can look at the rubric and say, these are actually the really important skills to be able to think like a historian, then I know that those are also the same skills that the 11th and 12th grade history teachers are working on. And so there's some continuity, and since they're clear about what the most important things that we want them to do and the ways that we want them to think as historians, what those things are. And so it just has given me a lot of clarity and kind of purpose to be able to narrow down what I'm asking students.
It forces you to think about sequencing in learning in a way that's not just looking at the state standards or thinking about how what normally is taught in ninth grade English or whatever. It's sort of like, no, actually, if we're saying that one of these indicators on this rubric is really important, then we need to make sure that we're teaching that in ninth grade on. Whereas if we say, oh, well, we're not expecting them to be able to compare two works of literature until later on, then I know I can give that up a little bit, not give it up completely, but I can focus more intensely on some of these more sort of foundational analysis skills in my 10th grade class, because that's what, when they get to 11th grade, that's going to be brought in new. So it both pushes, I think, teachers to say, like, this is how we're building student skills and being really deliberate and strategic about that. But I think it also allows sometimes teachers to not feel like you have to cover everything, because that's always this pressure, right? Like, there's so much to teach, there's so much to do. How do I do it all? All of those questions come up, and I think that by forcing us to really think about this vertical progression, it sort of allows you to let go of that a little bit. I think one thing that I've developed as a teacher over time using common rubrics is this idea of, it actually has helped me to break down the writing process, and to say, if this is the tool that I'm using to assess students, then I'm going to try to teach them in these chunks so that we can understand each section of the rubric or each domain of the rubric, and then figure out how they all fit together. So I think, like, if I'm thinking back to when I was sort of earlier in my career, I think when I would approach a writing assignment with them, it would just be like, all right, let's just do our first draft, and like maybe there would be an outline or something like that, but it wasn't, it felt like it was sort of like whole scale, let's just write, right? Whereas I feel like as I got more fluent in the rubric, it was like, well, actually this rubric sort of lays out for us what we're writing about and how we're writing it, not in like a formulaic way, but these are the pieces, and so I need to teach you these pieces first before we would do like a whole draft.
It's also given me a common language to use with my students. And so even if we're not doing a research paper, if we're doing debates or Socratic seminars or other discussions, we're still thinking about like argumentation or use of evidence or contextualizing historical sources. And so we can still talk about the same things that are all on the rubric. And I think it helps students be more clear about what those things are.
By having this common rubric that students begin to see in ninth grade and then continue to see over time, it, I think, gives them the beginning of a sense of understanding some of the sort of choice making that their teachers are going through, and it has them. It's really cool when kids start to say, like, oh, like, this is going to help me to get proficient on the rubric, right? Because you can tell that they've understood, whether they buy into it or not, but at least they've understood, like, this is something that I'm going to have to work towards over the course of my entire high school career.
When the rubrics are well done, and when I've used them well in class and taught them well, then students know what's expected of them. And in the last couple of years, I think I've gotten a lot better at using the rubrics well so students understand them. And so in many ways, students know what good work looks like. And so they can assess their work and get better without me having to give them as much feedback and have it all be through me. So I'm able to kind of step back and let students guide their own learning, because they'll say, oh, I know that I'm developing on this part of the rubric, and if this is what proficient looks like, I know how to get there.
When we're able to have the students really use the rubric themselves, first they have to understand the rubric, but then like if a teacher is able to have the students begin to use that rubric to self-assess, to give feedback to each other, to assess each other or whatever, then you get to a whole new level of understanding in terms of how students are just sort of like unpacking these really hard skills that we're asking them to do, right? It's not like my rubric is a rubric of like how to write a thesis statement, which is a hard thing to do anyway, but my rubric is how to analyze literature. And that's a really complicated cognitive skill that I think many students don't understand. Whether they're able to do it or not by college, I don't think students understand the processes or the different pieces that they have to do in order to get there. And I think that the rubric, when students start to use the rubric themselves, it's them really beginning to see the pieces, the different steps that their minds are going through, the metacognitive pieces that they need to do in order to get to that final sort of like, I can look at this book and come up with my own opinion about what it means in the world or how it connects to other things or whatever. And I think that the more that students can take on their own learning process and be aware of their progress towards this goal that they understand that's what we're going for as teachers.